So in my previous video, I talked a little bit about why you'd want to select Golang for your first language, but I didn't really go into any of the details. So today what I wanted to do was compare Go with another very popular language that's been around forever, which is JavaScript. JavaScript, I don't have a full history of it, but I remember it came out, when I was in very early parts of the web. It definitely transformed the way that the web was displayed and really brought the start of the innovations that we're seeing today. So it's been a huge component of the programming world and the tech world for a very long time. But there are due to the way that it was developed, I believe, and I've seen this in some other languages that begin to like put features in. It starts to have a lot of different uh, options and things that you kind of need to work around that can start to become confusing to someone without any knowledge of how to program. So when you're selecting a language, it can feel like a big decision, but also keep in mind that it's not a super big decision. It's not a super big deal to start with one and then switch over to another. I started learning on JavaScript, then I moved to C Sharp, and now Go, and then I've gotten back to JavaScript when I wanted to do some front end stuff. So this isn't like a you should do this or should do that. It's more just some things you want to be aware of when you start with JavaScript that you can avoid having to deal with if you went with Go, and some vice versa. Go also has some complexity in it that can take a little while to wrap your head around. So I want to just start with some of the basics here. What I have is just a folder that I'm going to upload to Github so that you can have a link to it and you can have all the code. But what I have here is just a folder with a JavaScript file inside of it, as well as a Go file inside of it. Just starting with the hello world, these both are going to pretty much do the same thing. I've created this folder, just in where I save all my packages, and I have PowerShell open here so that I can run the code. So let's just take a look at it. I can do ls. I can see that I'm in the folder, and I'll be running the JavaScript code with Node, and then Go has its own runner as well. We'll run JavaScript, and it's gonna just print out hello world, and go run go.go. We'll also do the same thing. It'll run hello world. So this goes. I think it took a little longer because it built it then ran it. So this is what the code looks like for these two. In JavaScript, you don't actually have to have anything around it to write anything. And with Go, you need a little bit. You need to define the package, import some anything that you're going to use. In this case, the FMT package, and then write out the command that you're looking to do. So they're pretty similar to start, but one of the things that I wanted to highlight and that can sometimes be a little bit confusing is some of the different ways that things are represented inside JavaScript. And what I mean by that is this is a string, so it's going to print out a string in console.log. But you can also declare strings in a different way. Console.log hello world will also actually do the same thing. I'll just do it too, just so that we have a specific difference. If I save it and run this, it will run and show hello world too, but it's not specific as to whether or not you can use double quotes or single quotes to define a string. And you'll see a lot of different coding styles use different ones. So that's one thing to keep in mind with JavaScript. As far as Go is concerned, if you just do format println and you actually try to declare it with anything else, like let's say we tried to do it this way, the IDE, if it's integrated with Go, or the build function will cause a problem. So it'll tell you that this is invalid, and it won't actually let you build it because strings have to be declared with double quotes. As an aside, you don't have to necessarily get into this, but single quotes in Go represent just a single character. So I can print out a single character in this way, but I won't be able to print out a full string. So anyways, that's not something that's really necessary to begin with, so we'll get rid of that. So the next important thing that you're going to deal with in JavaScript is that variables are all declared implicitly. So you can have strings, numbers, objects, arrays, everything like that, but you don't declare them explicitly. You'll do something like var x equals, we'll do 1, so that'll be declared as a number. Var y equals, we'll type hello world, just mark it as a 3. That's going to be declared as a string. That's going to be implicitly declared as a string. Var o equals, and you can also say this would be creating an object. Var a equals, and this would be creating an array. So nothing. You'll just be using this var function. This var to be creating and instantiating different variables, and it is going based on what you have on the right side of the equals will determine what the type is going to be. So you can end up declaring something as a number and then redeclaring it as a string, and it won't be angry with you. But in terms of on the Go side, things are more specific, and this is not a fault of the language. JavaScript has flexibility built into it because of its, what it's used for. That's not a negative. It's just when you're starting out, it's helpful to have these errors spelled out for you by on your build, and that's what happens in Go. So if I did var x is an int, I can say x equals 1, and this is valid. All right, I didn't use it because I didn't do anything with it. But if I tried to do x equals 1, it'll give me an error saying you can't use 1 as type string and declare it to an int. So it won't even allow me to build this, and I'll have to correct this line of code. And as I just showed you, this is actually something that can be kind of annoying when you're starting out, but really good coding practice is to not declare something and then never use it. Some languages, including JavaScript and some other languages, C#, will allow you to do it. They'll kind of highlight it for you, but they won't prevent you from doing it, which is something that Go does. So I would need to to use this in some way, in some function, or return the value in order for this error to go away. So I'll do that by saying we'll just print it out to the console. So fmt.println and then 1. Sorry, 1x. There we go. All right. So that kind of goes over one issue with declaring. So actually, one more thing about this. You can actually declare variables implicitly as well in Go. So if I did y using this operator, which will declare the variable as well as assign it, I can say it equals 2. And that is allowed. This is just saying it's not used. So to get rid of that, we'll do println y. And if I try to assign y again to another, it's going to tell me that I can't use type string. So it won't let me redeclare y because I've already declared it once as an int, and it's going to stay as an int, which is not true in JavaScript. So now when comparing two different variables, you may often need to see if x equals 1, y equals 2, a string equals someone's name, something like that. You'll need to use a comparison operator, and JavaScript actually has 2 of them. Most languages just use 1. And we'll go over, I won't go into the details on them, but we'll go over how they can sometimes throw you for a loop. if you're not aware of them, or if you make a mistake in your code and don't notice it, because they look the same. So the difference is, let's declare our variables. We have var v1 equals 3, and then var v2 equals the number 3. So this is a string representation, and this is a number. Now, I'm going to set, when I compare them, I'm going to set them equal to a variable. So we'll say we're going to compare them. The two different things are called a triple equals or a double equals. So it's triple equals, and I'll set this equal to the result of v1 triple equals v2, and then var double equals v1 double equals v2. And we'll print them out to the console. So what is going to happen here is a triple equals is going to say that this comparison is false, and the double equals is going to say that this comparison is true. So I had run this before. I'll just run it again, make sure I saved. Yeah. Run this again. Enter. Thank you. So this is false and this is true. So what this is saying is that including the types, are these two equal to one another? And no, they are not, because this is a string and this one is a number. But in double equals, I think the term is called coercion. I'll have to look. Yeah, I think it's coercion. And if you try to compare free, it'll do the little comparison for you and figure out that these two are the same. But I won't go into the details in it. Just something to be aware of if you start writing JavaScript. Know that you should most likely, in almost all cases, use triple equals unless you specifically are looking for this type of functionality. So in Go, this is much more simple. I can just say, if x is equal to y with a double equals, if this returns true, then print true. So there isn't actually double equals in Go. There's only one way to do a comparison in Go, and you won't be able to compare different types. So if I say this is a string, it'll just tell me that they're mismatched types. So this isn't going to be a valid comparison. Okay, so in JavaScript, the next thing I want to go over is the difference between null, undefined, and empty. So let's say var t1 is equal to null. This means that I've declared variable t1, but I haven't said what it points to, or what this maybe references, or what value it holds. I'm just declaring the variable, which is valid. I can do var t2, which equals just an empty string, and I can do var t3, which equals an empty object. And I'll show you why I'm doing an object in a minute. So I do console log. We'll see what the result of this is. So I can log t1. This is going to be null. Var t2, or sorry, console.log t2. I forgot to close my Steam. Yay. Okay. Console.log t2. Console.log t3. I'll go over what I'm getting at here in a moment. T4. Okay. So with T1, we have declared it. It is null, so this should return it should print out null. With T2, it should print out an empty line because I'm telling it to write a line, but I'm not giving it. I'm giving it an empty string. With T3, I'm going to set it equal to an empty object. Since this object has no properties, I'm going to try to declare, not declare, I'm going to try to read from a property that it doesn't have, or a field that it doesn't have. And with this, I'm going to try to access a variable that was never declared in the first place. So what we're going to do is see what the result of these is. So we ended at true. We have null, which is returned. We have the empty string. Then we have undefined. So this means it doesn't return null because T3 is not null. It's just that T3 dot, whatever doesn't actually exist within the object, and that's called undefined. This can as you start programming in JavaScript, you are going to run into this all the time. You need to check for null, you need to check for whatever, and if you're using strings, you're going to need to check for empty in many cases, depending on how you do it. So there's just a number of things you need to check for to make sure they are valid before you can move forward with some pieces of code. And then finally, it will allow me to run this when I haven't actually declared T4, but it will crash my program. So this is the result of the program crashing because I've tried to access some some variable that was never defined in the first place. So I can get rid of this, and I can run it again, and this is all valid code, and it doesn't throw me the error. But again, something to be aware of. And it won't say undefined either. It'll say, T4 is not defined, which is, I guess, different from undefined. And again, these are some of the things that I want to highlight with JavaScript. So if we go to Go, and let's do some similar type of thing here, just to let's see if we can do some comparison directly. So if I can declare, let's say if I declare a string, var s string, it's going to create the string. It'll create it empty, but it won't allow me to assign it a null value. So I'll be able to, I'm at print, oops, wrong keys, s, and this is valid. Let's go to run. So it does the same thing that it does in JavaScript, except that I can't set string to null. So I won't have to check whether or not a string is null. It'll always have a value, it just may be empty. So there's only one thing you have to account for. You do have null values that we'll get into in a moment in Go, but you don't have the issue of undefined. So if I tried to access fmt.println s1, it's going to fail the build and say that you've never defined s1. And it won't allow me to move forward. And this can come up a lot, actually, when you start programming and you kind of lose track of all the variables that you're using, and maybe you mistype a word that has an I in it. If you did this and you tried to do a console log of triple equals, but missed that you were missing an I here, it'll say this is undefined. It'll say it's not defined, not undefined. So the next thing that I want to go over, which can sometimes be a feature, sometimes be a little bit of a problem, is the way that JavaScript automatically converts values for you when you add them together. So if I have these 4 variables that I'm going to use, which is, let me scroll up a bit, var n1 equals 1, var n2 equals zebra, var n3 equals 2, and var n4 equals another number, which is 4. So I'm going to add these together and show you some of the different results that you can get. Console.log n1, all right, hit the keys correctly, n2, console.log n1 plus n3, console.log n1 plus 4. So let me just run this first, and then we'll explain what's going on. So we get, after our undefined, which is the last thing that we went over, we get 1 zebra, 12, and 5. So what happened here is that if you take a number and you add it to a string, it'll convert this number to a string and then perform the addition. And when you add two strings together, it will put them both together. So it's kind of a fast way to build a string. And if you take 1 and add it to 2, which is still a string represented by a number, it'll still add them together. It'll convert the 1 to a string. It won't actually perform any addition. So you just get the result of 12, which is actually string representation of 1, 2. But if you take 1 and add it to another number, 4, you'll get the result of 5, which what it's doing is actually performing the addition as you would normally expect in a mathematical situation. So that sometimes is a nice feature, sometimes can be a little bit of a problem. In Go, they actually don't allow you to perform this. So in Go, you actually have to get familiar with, and this is one of the complexities that I was getting at, is if you have something like a number and you want to do something with it as a string, you have to convert between the two types. You can't just, immediately go from one to the other. So if you want to go, we'll start with the going from a number to a string. And one easy way to do that is this printf. Sorry, we'll do sprintf. So what you want to do is go over if you ever come up to this, if you decide to go with Golang. So we have x as a number. You'll want to look up sprintf and see what these special characters do. This is going to say, take this and represent it. It has a special converter for integers. Since x is an integer, this is a good thing. So we'll call this R. So this, and we'll do format println. Okay, so if we go and run this, we'll get our 1 value again. So you'll do this. You'll run into this in a number of different ways. If you have floats, which are essentially, not really, but there's a little more than that. But floats are numbers with decimal points. You'll be using this sprintf in various ways to convert things to a string quickly. Now, if you need to go the other direction, and this is where it can get a little confusing, is that you have to use another package, which is string converter, strconvert. And my IDE is set up so that it will automatically import this. And we'll take this atoi function, and if you hover over it, it should, I have to save it first. So now it's, as I save Visual Studio Code has automatically imported that library. You can hover over it and say what it will do is it's going to take, it's going to essentially it's going to parse the integer in base 10. Or sorry, parse the string and turn it into a base 10 integer. So this is a fast way to work with integers. So if I needed to take the value 2 as a string and get it out as a number, let's call this s2, and I'll go over error in a second. So what string convert does is it's going to try to convert this string to an integer, and if it doesn't, it's going to return something here, which will be an error. So you need to check when you do this conversion to make sure that this actually worked. You'll need to check for it. So we'll do if error is not equal, and this is the Go doesn't have null, it has nil. and prints error. So I won't go into the details of this piece. I need to print yes, S2. Right, just so it won't yell at me. So what this is going to do is convert this to an integer, and then if for some reason there's an error, we'll instead print the error. You know, if this is not equal to nil. So let me actually a better representation of what we're going to do. Let's say S2 is equal to S2 plus 1. So we should get the value 3 here. So we'll run this, and there we go. All right, so the last thing that I want to go over in JavaScript is that there are a number of different ways to actually declare a function. I'm not going to go over all of them actually, but I'm just going to go over a few of them. And I'm just going to type them out. First, we'll have function, we'll just call it 1. So we'll say function, and then it's going to console.log 1. So this is one way. We say that this is going to be a function, and name the function, and then define input parameters. And in this case, we're going to have none. And then we'll just, what this method is just going to do is write 1 to the console. So the next thing you can do is you can actually set a variable equal to a function, and this will do console.log 2. So when you see different types of code, examples of code, you'll see this as well. And the final one that I'm going to go over is var 3 equals function 3 named console.log 3. So we can all call these the same. What this one is just a basic function declaration. This one is saying this variable is equal to a function. And this one is saying the variable is equal to the function, but the function has a name renamed. But you actually call them all in the same way. 1, 2, 3. To get them printed out, 1, 2, 3 as we would expect. So you'll run into different pieces of code, and it took me a while to figure out that these are all actually doing essentially the same thing from my perspective. And just something to be aware of again with JavaScript as you try to write your own. Generally want to decide on one style to work with, but you'll run into different styles as you look at different pieces of code and see different answers on Stack Overflow. Golang alternatively does make this a little bit more straightforward. You just declare function println, and you call it the same way. And this is the only way to actually declare a function. There's a couple more things you can do with this, as in you can have a receiver value and you can have return values. I won't get into it, but it still follows the same format and does essentially, except for receiver values, it's essentially the same thing. So hopefully that gives you some idea as to the differences that can occur between two languages, and a little bit of some of the things that you might be able to avoid when you're just starting out in Go versus JavaScript. And one thing to keep in mind though is that it doesn't really matter what you start out with. Each language, and this theme you're going to run into all over the place, is which one is better? Well, it depends. And it depends on what you're trying to do, what you're trying to accomplish. Each language is going to have its own purpose. For instance, you can't really write a web framework that's as sophisticated in JavaScript as you can with Go. So there's always a right, not necessarily right, but it's always arguable as whether or not one is better for another. And it's always best to keep in mind the purpose of the application that you're trying to build. But that's down the road. I just wanted to highlight some of the things that as you're learning, you'll need to be aware of when you choose JavaScript. and some of the things that you could be able to start out with Go.